You're good to go. Thanks. I'll leave you alone.
Okay. Well, thank you. Um, like Steve said, my name is Eamon Leonard. I work in Georgia with the Georgia Department of Natural Resources in our non-game conservation section. And so this section of the state government works with a lot of rare and endangered species, whales, sea turtles, mammals, dolphins, as well as plants. And so I'm a plant biologist. I've been with the state for about 6 years. First 2.5 years, 3 years, I did plant community mapping. And the last 2.5, 3 years, I've been working in the area of invasive species. So I'm going to talk to you all today about what we've been trying to do on the coast to kind of get a handle on how to manage invasive species. It can often be like trying to figure out how to eat an elephant. Where do you start? And so we've kind of adopted an approach that's used in other nearby states, which is the CISMA model. Some people call it a CWMA. So I'm going to talk about what is a CISMA and kind of sort of the timeline we went through here to kind of get to where we are and why we decided to adopt this particular model. I've got about 32 slides, so I won't spend a ton on each slide. Okay, let's see if I can get it to advance. Okay, there we go. I was stuck. So first, what is a CISMA or a CWMA? So CWMA, first off, stands for Cooperative Weed Management Area. So it's usually just dealing with plants. A Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area, or CISMA, takes into account more than just plants, so animals, insects, sometimes diseases. And so we kind of felt we wanted to take a broader approach in the coast because we deal with a wide suite of potential problems. There's a few things that kind of define what a CISMA is, sort of organizational things. So first off, it generally operates within a specific area, often a grouping of counties. Often they're counties that agencies tend to work in anyways. Sometimes it's defined by a specific weed problem, and you're sort of making your organized group based off of where the range of that species is, potentially political boundaries, type of community or climate, different things that just make sense for your group to operate within that particular area. Within the area that it is chosen, you're wanting to involve a broad cross-section of people who are managing lands in that area. So it can be nonprofits, volunteer groups, state, city, county, federal agencies, those kind of things. You want to be incorporating people who are managing lands in your geographic boundary. You also want a subset of those managers to sort of function as decision makers, as a steering committee to sort of govern what direction you want your group to go and kind of keep things going at an even keel. Finally, or next, you want the group to have a commitment to cooperation. Sometimes you need a formal agreement through an MOU to do that, but it's kind of a no-brainer. You're all at the table together. Your objectives are the same, that you have a concern about invasive species, and you want that to continue into the future. Next, you want to develop a plan, generally, that is comprehensive, that helps you make sure you are making progress. It also is something you can show others that might want to understand better what are your priorities and why are you prioritizing certain species. And then you can include things like how do you manage those species. So it's just a document that you can share within your CISMA and with other groups if they have questions. And finally, one of the greatest benefits is that you can start facilitating cooperation across boundaries. So if you're a state park next to a national park, we've already sort of started working together. So if you have an issue on one piece of land and your neighbors also has the same invasive species issue, hopefully this sort of organization will help facilitate cooperation so you can sort of tackle some sort of invasive species issue in a more regional approach instead of really just on your property and ignoring those around you. So next thing I thought I would bring up is, okay, I've told you what a CISMA is. Why would you start one? And this is kind of why we wanted to start it, all these different things that are advantages. First off, you're able to share knowledge. I when I first got to, because I've only been here 6 years, there's sort of a depth of knowledge that's here through people who've been working in other agencies, and so to be able to tap into that is a great benefit. Even our first meeting we had, you had people who had met each other but maybe had heard of each other and realized they were working on the same invasive species issue, and they already started communicating about what chemicals and methods did they use to be successful. So that's one of the first benefits. As you sort of have these conversations and share knowledge, oftentimes you can share resources. Maybe you have an extra batch of chemical that you don't need that you can give to another agency that has a project coming up, or you can come up with some sort of equipment sharing agreement. And through these interactions, you're ideally strengthening your partnerships with the agency within your CISMA, which can be fruitful in many other ways. When you do organize in this way, often funding agencies will see that organization and will give you some advantages in your applications for funding. We've seen that with a NIFWF grant that we applied for a few years ago. Before we were organized, we didn't get it. But once we organized and could show that we had sort of a cross-section of buy-in by other agencies, we got our funding. Not to say that's exactly why we got our funding. Maybe we wrote it better the next time, but it definitely doesn't hurt to increase your funding opportunities. And with all this kind of building on the advantages, you're increasing your effectiveness as well. You're able to leverage more resources to get more done. And the more you're doing, the more you're out there. Hopefully we're raising public awareness either through news articles or just your physical presence at a project. It's like you see all these trucks by the side of the road, all these different logos on these trucks. People might start to ask questions like, oh, what's going on? What are you doing? And with that, you might be able to get more volunteers to be mobilized once awareness is raised, as well as you get more organized. Different agencies have different volunteer pools, and you can even have a greater likelihood of being able to swap and loan out your volunteers or send email alerts to your list. And then finally, one of the greatest advantages is this EDRR concept, early detection, rapid response objective, where you're able to detect something new and early before it becomes a problem. So we've got all these eyes on the ground, and they're all buying into the same concept of looking out for invasive species in our geographic region. And so you can quickly pick up a phone and talk to someone that you've already been interfacing with because you know they deal with a certain issue, either if it's within our CISMA or maybe the one in Florida. So it's hopefully going to increase our ability to respond to something new and novel that could be a potential threat. All right. Okay, so just to give you an overview of where else there are CISMAs or CWMAs, this is a map on invasive.org that shows you across the country where these types of alliances organized. So they're not just in the neighboring state in Florida, but they're all over. Georgia and the Carolinas do have some, but they're more focused on a single species. If you look at the key, in the Carolinas, they have a beach vitex task force. So those two states have aligned just on that one species issue. And then Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, and Tennessee each have CISMAs that are really focused on Kogon grass because it's such a huge threat. So other than that, there aren't really that many CISMAs organized in the southeastern states except for Florida. And I'll show you a little closer. So this is Florida. They have, I think, about 18 CISMAs that pretty much cover the whole state. So they're really well represented and organized, and they're kind of a model that we've been looking at to kind of maybe catalyze the other states, starting obviously with Georgia, to look at this way of organizing to increase our effectiveness. So just to go through some timelines about where we were and where we are, there's probably more things that have happened in the past, but sort of one of the bigger things happened in 2007. on Jekyll Island. If you don't know the Georgia coast, we have a string of barrier islands, and Jekyll Island is one of our state parks. And in 2007, several folks organized an exotic pest plant and ID and control workshop just to kind of raise awareness and give people a lot of really good information about invasive species and what they can do on the coast. I arrived in December of 2007 working on a completely different project, so I wasn't involved back then. And then in 2009, a big cross-section of state agencies got together and created the Georgia Invasive Species Advisory Committee. And from that, they created the Georgia Invasive Species Strategy, which is a really great document that tried to prioritize just statewide what are the invasive species issues, looking at plants, animals, insects, the whole suite. So we have that as sort of a foundational document that was created in 2009. By the time I came along with having invasive species as my job duty in 2011, we had a brainstorming meeting on August 3rd and tried to just get to all the people who we thought would have an interest to kind of figure out, okay, well, how do we move forward? Some of these were the same people we had in 2007 at the Jekyll meeting. And so the concept of CISMA was brought up at that meeting. And so we just discussed it further and tried to figure out, okay, who else do we need to get at the table to flesh this out? So we had a series of meetings throughout 2011 into 12 with the final idea said, okay, let's have a big meeting and try to get even more people together and discuss this concept of CISMA with them. And so we asked Kate Howe with the Midwest Invasive Plant Network and author of the CWMA cookbook to come talk and kind of give us an overview of what it is we're up against and how do we organize and how do we get this thing off the ground. We also invited Emily Montgomery, who is part of the First Coast Invasive Working Group, which is our CISMA just to the south in Florida, to have her come and talk and give us their perspective on what they've had to do to organize and be effective. I think I have, this is the, not to obliterate you with a bunch of logos, but this is just sort of a representative of who we got to come to that meeting. So we had about 42 different agencies, tried to get as good of a cross-section of people who are managing lands or organizing with invasive species as something of their interest. We didn't get everyone, and we're still trying to pull in partners, but I think we did a pretty good job with our first meeting. This is our basic agenda, that we had a full-day meeting with Emily and Kate speaking, and we had an afternoon of sort of breakout sessions, having the groups kind of talk about, okay, how do you think this CISMA idea could work? What do you see as barriers? How do we organize this? How do we move forward? Trying to make sure that we weren't just stepping off a cliff and we had no buy-in from anyone else. But we had a really good response at that meeting, I thought, and seemed like this was really the natural way we needed to go to move forward. And from that meeting, we ended up with our steering committee at the end of the day. And so that was a great outcome. So after that, we had our steering committee meeting, just a smaller group of about 11. And we really just discussed what kind of things we need to do to keep moving forward and prepare for another meeting the next year. What kind of projects? How can we get grants? And so we had the next meeting in March of 2013, and we kind of were moving into a different realm of okay, we are CISMA, and we spent this meeting kind of looking at our vision, mission, and guiding principles. It's kind of a technical, foundational document type meeting. And we had a couple talks about some success stories, especially in the Kogon grass realm for that meeting. And then we had First Coast Invasive Working Group come again and give us a talk about, okay, we're next to y'all. What do we see as a potential for moving up the road? We also took the meeting as a way to organize our invasive species list, to prioritize what invasive species we are concerned about and rank them in 4 different groups. And so we had breakout groups for that and had a lot of discussion. And so that was a very productive part, too, is to get a variety of perspectives on how to rank the invasive species that we are concerned about on the coast. And so after that meeting, we again had more steering committee meetings to kind of keep things going, to coalesce all the information we got from that meeting and put it in a form that we could sort of start handing out as, okay, this is our vision, this is our mission, to hand out in the future. And so again, I wanted to just highlight the role that the First Coast Invasive Working Group, Emily Montgomery and Jessica Spencer, played in kind of coaching us along, giving us input, especially on the organizational stuff. Emily came up to the coast for a sort of organizational meeting with our steering committee to kind of walk us through how do you develop your strategic management plan and all this kind of things that are kind of boring, but they need to be done. So our progress to date, like I mentioned, we have a steering committee of 11 members. The map to the right shows sort of the area that we decided to go with. It's an 11 coastal county area of Georgia. There's 6 first tier that hug the coast, and they have each a few barrier islands in each county. And so we have representatives on our steering committee from DNR, Wildlife Resources Division, and our Coastal Resources Division, the Nature Conservancy, the Georgia Forestry Commission, the Sapelo National Estuarine Research Reserve, Little St. Simons, the Fish and Wildlife Service, Georgia Ports Authority, Jekyll Island Authority, and the University of Georgia Marine Extension. And then we decided to go with an idea of 2 coordinators, with me with Non-Game Wildlife Resources Division and Allison McGee with the Nature Conservancy. So we're sort of tasked with kind of keeping everything going. Like I mentioned, we've had 2 annual meetings to date. We've tried to do other things throughout the year, having some outreach workshops, using a reporting tool that we use in Georgia called EdMap, and I'm going to go over that a little bit more in a minute. We've organized quite a few work days trying to tackle things that are a higher priority on the coast or that are sort of in high priority habitats. Like I mentioned, we've spent some time on our guiding documents, which includes sort of an overall strategic plan, a 5-year plan of where we want the CISMA to go. And then we're in the process of creating an annual operating plan, which we would do every year, which would sort of map out the goals that we want to set and achieve each year. And we finished our vision, mission, and guiding principles. And we're still working on an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, so that hasn't held us back from collaborating, but it's something we still want to get everyone to sign. It's kind of a lot of work to get all these disparate agencies to agree on language and getting them to just sign it and be done with it. Like I mentioned, we were able to get a grant with NIFWA, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, for $50,000, and this is for 2 years, and it's going to be able to fund 2 Student Conservation Association interns for 15 weeks, and it's going to fund part of Allison's salary as a coordinator, and there's also additional money in there for supplies and for us to print publications. We were also able to get a $5,000 grant from a group called TURN, and they stand for the Environmental Resources Network, and they're basically a friends group of our DNR non-game conservation section. And with that grant, we were able to buy a cargo trailer and chainsaws and other equipment, and I'm going to talk about that and show you some pictures of what we've been able to get, and that's really helped us with mobilizing and getting to different sites. And then finally, we were awarded an AmeriCorps NCCC team twice. We did a very small project a couple years ago for 2 days doing water hyacinth removal, and then we had a larger 5 project collaborative for 16 days this past fall, and I'm going to go into some of the work that we were able to accomplish with those teams. And just to go back to EdMaps, if you all haven't heard of it, it's run by the University of Georgia Center for Invasive Species and Ecosystem Health. They're based out of Tifton, Georgia. There are several other sort of distribution mapping system projects out there. We just have landed on this one. It's in Georgia. It's free. We know most people who work there, and it just seems to be a good model for us to use. So it's a centralized database for reporting invasive species. It has these slick apps for your iPhone and iPad and Android smartphones, which makes it really easy for people to report data. But you can also do the old school print off a data sheet and type it in and enter it in online. And with this system, it's only as good as the data you get. So we're trying to increase people's awareness of it as a tool. And part of the EdMaps, and this is something that the folks in Florida do a really good job at, is the CISMA would supply verifiers for the data that's being entered. In Florida, I think they have a couple verifier, or at least one verifier for each county. We're not to that point yet in Georgia, but that is a goal, is to increase the number of people who can assist with verifying the records that are inputted into the system. So like I mentioned earlier from our second meeting, we came up with a prioritization of the invasive species on the Georgia coast. And this is one of our big first goals that we wanted to do, is sort of figure out, okay, what are we dealing with on the coast? What are our invasive species of interest? And then where do they fall out as far as ranking? So we used a model of prioritization based off of the Georgia Exotic Pest Plant Council. They have a priority 1 through 3, and then they have this invasive species watch list, which the watch list contains things that are not in our state yet, but if they do come here, they could cause a lot of problems. So we coalesced all the data and information we got from input from our second meeting and put things into these different priority lists. And this is something that could change year to year as we understand the impact of certain invasive species or other people's perspectives. And so we came up with 5 different lists. So we put things into the invasive freshwater fauna like the flathead catfish. We have the invasive marine fauna like the lionfish. We have an invasive terrestrial invertebrates list like the red bay ambrosia beetle or the invasive apple snails. For plants, we didn't do terrestrial or aquatic. We just lumped everything together. So you'd have water hyacinth and Chinese tallow in the same list. And then we have a list of invasive terrestrial vertebrates like the feral hogs or the non-native snakes that might be here. So the rest of the presentation, I'm going to just kind of go through some of the work we've been able to accomplish with this organization, sort of trying to go chronologically as best I can. So one of the first major projects, even before we were as well organized, was to try to tackle Phragmites australis, or common reed. This is a species of major concern, a major problem in the Northeast states and the Gulf Coast states. We don't really have as much in Georgia. In the Altamaha Delta where we're concentrating, we have maybe 50 acres. And so it's a 3-year process or a 3-year program of spraying to get it under control. I think we'd like to eradicate it from these localized locations. Each little spot's maybe a couple acres. So we have a potential of being able to be successful. So this year actually marked the 3rd year of our spraying efforts. So I would be contracting with a helicopter, and they come out and spray. But after the first year of spraying, I had a bunch of volunteers, including some folks from TNC and Georgia Department of Natural Resources, the coastal office, come out and help me cut it down. The idea there being that we've sprayed it and we've killed it. Let's remove all the biomass so if, when it regrows and we respray, it has better surface contact. It was a lot of effort, and so we didn't do it again the 2nd year, but we're doing it after this 3rd year to kind of get a handle on how well these 3 years of spraying has worked. Also, and if it does work, to kind of open up the soil to help native species start taking hold. So that's been a big chore, but I think since we have such a small area, we might have a chance of eradicating this one from at least the Altamaha Delta region. Another project that's been ongoing for a long time, the Nature Conservancy and the Altamaha Riverkeeper and some other nonprofits like Coastal Wildscapes have done various removals of water hyacinth on the Altamaha River here in coastal Georgia. But we kind of brought it back again in 2012 organizing, again, to try to kind of nibble away at this species. It's kind of a hard one to really get rid of. If you don't know water hyacinth, it's a floating aquatic. It has a really attractive flower. It's very popular in ponds and backyard gardening. But it doesn't attach to the substrate below, so it's just floating. It's actually pretty easy to get up. It's just there's so much of it. So this is kind of an ongoing problem and project. But it's something that I think people can participate in, and it's a really good public outreach event. So in 2012, we did a couple days with a handful of volunteers. In this past year, 2013, we used an AmeriCorps crew of about 15 and put them in kayaks and canoes and buckets and just floated them out to these areas and piled them into boats and then dumped the biomass onto a sandy field on DNR property to just dry up, and then we tilled it in. So this is a project we're going to do again this year, 2014. We're going to move to do some more work in the Satilla as well as the Altamaha. So we're going to start another site as well. Another project that we've worked on this past summer is a collaboration with the City of Midway and a nonprofit called Coastal Wildscapes. If you've ever been to Midway, Georgia, it's midway up the coast. The city has put in this really beautiful boardwalk that goes through various wetland communities from sort of upland maritime into freshwater wetlands all the way up to a salt brackish creek. And along the boardwalk, they have two things. They have Japanese honeysuckle and Chinese tallow. I think we're going to be able to get the Chinese tallow out of there. They don't have a ton of it. But the honeysuckle is a species we don't often work with because it's such a big problem. It's almost maybe a waste of resources. It's kind of hard to even find a light at the end of the tunnel. But this is a small location that we think we can have some measurable amount of success. So this is something we did about 5 different work days between April and August this past year. And so it's with a lot of effort. And we'll do it again next year and see where we are. But it's also a good way to raise public awareness and also bring attention to this really incredible boardwalk up in that part of Georgia. Another work partnership has been with the St. Simons Land Trust. This past year, they've been able to acquire over 600-acre peninsula on St. Simons Island, mostly maritime forest. It has an old ruin of I guess, a late 18th century estate on the north end. And we were concentrating a lot in that area with the species Lantana camara, big leaf lantana. And this is another one we don't often spend a lot of time managing, but we were able to have a reasonable level of success with this project. And so we've held quite a few work days trying to remove that. They're wanting to open the area up to public for hiking, and so it's kind of in anticipation for that to kind of clean up and give people an experience of the maritime forest and the natural communities that aren't overridden with invasives. Another species that's out there is the tree of heaven, which is a huge problem elsewhere, but this is the only location we know of in coastal Georgia. So correct me if you all have found it elsewhere, but this is another species where we have a reasonable trajectory of success in eradicating. So this is another species we're working with them to deal with. So like I mentioned earlier, we were able to get funding to fund 2 Student Conservation Association interns. And this was partly funded through the grant, and Nature Conservancy also put in a substantial amount of funding and housed them for this past summer. So we had about 12 different agencies sort of present to me some projects that they could work on through the summer, through the 15 weeks. And so we just scheduled it out, and they just bounced around to these different projects with these different agencies. And so I think this was one of the more concrete ways we've been able to strengthen our partnerships and give our different partners some benefits for being a part of this alliance. And it was just really interesting. And I know that the 2 guys we hired this past year got a lot of great experience seeing just how different agencies operate and being able to go out all the different barrier islands that we have here and just experiencing different types of environments that we have here. So one of the first projects I had them do was again, using this EdMap system, take some trajectories and some roads that might be good vectors for invasive species, and look at what species are there with some sort of an eye for maybe things that might be coming up from Florida. So they spent our first few weeks just mapping invasive species and produced a map for us. They also work with a couple partners that really needed some mapping help, like the St. Simons Land Trust. They have several pieces of property on St. Simons, and they work with them to produce some good data for them so they can help prioritize their management on these land trust properties that they've acquired. So this next part, I'm just going to go through pretty quickly what different projects they worked on. So in coastal Georgia, Chinese tallow is a big problem. In some areas, it's almost insurmountable. But we had several different groups come to us to suggest some projects. So Jekyll Island is one area that after the summer, they really felt like the work that the interns did got them much closer to having things almost manageable to a very small population of remaining Chinese tallow. So that was a really good outcome, and they're very happy with what had happened. Oswald Island is an area where we have really a lot of tallow, so we put in some monitoring plots to kind of look at different treatment methods. Sapelo is another area where there's just a lot of tallow, but they helped me put in some monitoring plots and worked on some areas around the hog hammock community, which is a traditional community out there, help them remove some tallow from their properties, and then in some sensitive interdudal meadow areas. And again, on St. Simons Island, they did a lot of mapping for the land trust, especially in areas where we might not have realized that there was tallow before. And then again, like I mentioned at Cay Creek, they helped with the Chinese tallow there. They were very helpful with tackling the Phragmites. We do use a helicopter for most of it, but there's some areas where the helicopter cannot get, and so I utilize the interns to kind of get into the areas where there might be a shadow where the chemical wouldn't be able to safely be applied. And so they did more hand spraying in those areas, as well as they found a new location for us for the species on I-95, kind of north of the city of Woodbine. So not a happy result, but it's great to know that it's where it is. The next species that they worked on was tamarisk or salt cedar. This is more of a problem out west, but it's becoming more and more present here on the coast. And so I first had them kind of help us tackle how much is there, and they spent a lot of time mapping areas just so we can get a baseline of how much there is. And then we had a couple of treatment projects here at the headquarters for DNR in Brunswick, and then a property that the Army Corps manages as a wetland restoration site. And then again, they did help with the lantana at Cannons Point and mapping locations of it elsewhere on St. Simons. And then honeysuckle, that they really concentrated at that Cay Creek property, helping on those 5 different work days. And like I mentioned, tree of heaven. If you don't know the species, it's really common in the Northeast. It kind of has a sumac kind of look to it. A deciduous tree, very large leaves. They have some really distinct characteristics. If you crush the leaves, it kind of smells like a rancid sort of funky peanut butter smell. And then at the base of each leaflet, there's a pretty obvious a dark gland at the base of each leaflet. So they helped us with this species on Cannons Point. Camphor tree is another tree that's very common invasive in coastal Georgia. It's almost insurmountable in some areas, but they spend a lot of time helping us map where the species is, as well as treating some, especially at our DNR headquarters. We're trying to not have as many invasive species for the public to see as they come visit their DNR headquarters here in Brunswick. Thorny olive is a common shrub, obviously used in hedging and a lot of times by DOT in stabilizing sort of overpass hillsides. They worked we didn't really do any treatments out there, but I had to map all the locations where it's on public land so we can see if it's moving from these plantings. But they worked in treating over 40 acres on the Savannah National Wildlife Refuge in collaboration with them. So they have a substantial problem with it up there, and there's still more left to be done with that area. Sand pine is a species that in Georgia we consider invasive. If anyone's listening and from Florida, you might be a little surprised, but this is a species that was planted here in areas that were more traditionally longleaf pine, sort of scrub oak sandhills, and it's just not an appropriate species here. It crowds out some rare species, including a rare mint that we have here, as well as sort of decreasing the habitat for gopher tortoises in that type of habitat. And so we were working in collaboration with the Nature Conservancy to remove sand pine in areas that are specific habitat for the Radford's mint. Another little project that they worked on was Cuban tree frogs, which unfortunately we're seeing more of in our barrier islands on the Georgia coast. Jekyll Island has a good program and some great staff that have put out some monitoring tubes for the tree frog, and so they went out and helped them monitor a few times. This is a frog that, in the picture that they found this past summer, and we have another one that they found later on that I'm actually keeping in my office for educational purposes. So, so that's another up-and-coming species that is kind of hard to get your handle on what their impacts are, but it's a very large tree frog. So if you don't know it, it looks like it's kind of a warty, toady-looking tree frog with quite large toe pads. And apparently the skin on the head is fused to the skull, which is apparently uncommon in tree frogs. But if you just see a really large tree frog, it has variable coloring. But one of the biggest threats of this species is that it's a carnivorous. It eats other tree frogs, and probably whatever else the native tree frogs would be eating. They work with Little St. Simons looking at fire ants, and their concern with fire ants is with sea turtle nesting. They've been known to infest the sea turtle nest. So they went through and baited with test tubes and hot dogs. They would put these test tubes with a hot dog in the nest, and then they would come back later to see if there were ants present. And then they would come back with an ant poison to remove the fire ants from those locations. But they also learned about what native ants are in the area, so they found that really interesting, that these two interns hadn't really looked at ants that way, about how do you tell them apart. So it was kind of cool for them to learn about, okay, yes, there are ants present, but how do you tell them from the invasive? And then finally, this isn't an invasive species, but they helped our bird biologists with some shorebird nest counting. And one project that they helped us with, this is the trailer that the Turn group, the Friends Group for Non-Game, that $5,000 helped fund. And this has been really crucial to help us get equipment and chemicals out to different sites. So Matt and Gus, the two SCA interns, helped me outfit it with shelving and hangers and all that kind of stuff, things you need to have to be able to organize your stuff. And so they were very proud of it, and I had them sign the inside of the trailer and all that. So it was kind of a fun project, and we've got signage on the outside of it. So now that when we take it to a location, hopefully this will help raise public awareness about, okay, what are these people doing? And then they see our trailer, and it's got information on it, and hopefully they'll stop and talk to us and learn about what it is we're doing at that particular site. The AmeriCorps crew, we had the 2-day crew in 2012 helping with water hyacinths, but we wrote a proposal to see if we could get a dedicated crew to do invasive species work, and we did. It was I guess a 5-week period of time, and they collaborated with the Nature Conservancy, Army Corps, Sapo Island, and then our game management section. And so I'm just going to go through briefly the different projects that they worked on while they were here. So the first one was salt cedar or tamarisk, and they worked at it at our DNR office here. We have a substantial amount of it around our campus, as well as an area that the Army Corps manages as a wetland mitigation site just near the city of Brunswick, called Andrews Island. It's a dredge spoil island And so tamarisk, at least here, really likes coming into those disturbed dredge areas, causeway edges, and some of our native hammocks, kind of taking out some of our scrub species. So this is potentially a species that if we really work at it, we might be able to have an impact on. So that's something that I think our CISMA needs to start identifying is what are the species that are doable as far as getting to eradication or potentially reducing their long-term impact on the coast. So this is one that I kind of think we should put in that category. So with this one, we kind of based the method that we used on what the folks in Florida did. I spent a work day down with them near Jacksonville where you basically girdle the tree with a chainsaw and then spray the appropriate herbicide at the appropriate rate in that cut. So we were in an aquatic area, so we used an aquatic rated herbicide. And apparently that's, girdling is supposed to be better than hack and squirt for this species. So we were out there with chainsaws and backpack sprayers for, I guess, a few days, maybe 6 days between these two sites. And again, they helped with the sand pine. This is at one of our wildlife management areas. Like I mentioned before, it should traditionally be more of a longleaf pine, scrub oak, sandhill community, home to gopher tortoises and the sweetest species, and including this rare Radford's mint, which is the only known population for that species. They worked on 2 of our barrier islands, Sapelo Island and Ossabaw. These are 2 islands that, like I mentioned before, really have a kind of a bad problem with tallow tree, and these are 2 areas where we've installed some monitoring plots. And so they help us a lot of just hack and squirt treatments out there in sensitive habitats and helping us with installing the monitoring methods as far as the different types of treatments out there. So it was a good project. I think we learned a lot. It was a very hot day, a lot of exhaustion. So learned a lot about how to use your team wisely. So we'll probably make changes in the future when we're working out there again. So this was a quick overview of the kind of stuff that we've done the last couple of years, and we're not done yet. So we're doing a lot of planning for this coming year. We're going to have our 3rd annual meeting this coming March. Still trying to tackle down the exact date. But with this meeting, I think we're going to concentrate a lot more on what are people doing, having quick talks about, okay, what is the species you're working on, what methods are you using. Very much a notes from the field type of meeting to kind of boost more of that collaboration and sharing of knowledge for that meeting. We're going to continue our annual water hyacinth removal, and like I mentioned, we're going to expand it from not just the Altamaha River, but also the Satilla River, which is south of us or in southern part of the county, in the coastal area in Camden County. And we're going to continue trying to get people to understand and use the EDMAP system. So we'll be scheduling training sessions for that this coming year. Another thing we want to complete is to get a website. So we have all these vision, mission, guiding principles in our invasive species list. We want to have a place where people can interface with that, as well as have our calendar and lots of other information to kind of raise the public understanding of what we're trying to do on the coast. And we're going to get 2 more interns, SCA interns, starting probably June 2nd. And we're going to apply again for an AmeriCorps team. Last year we had around 3, which is earlier in the year, so more in the summer. We're going to push them hopefully closer to the fall. The coast in that earlier period was quite brutal and hot and buggy, and so I think they might not come back if we don't make some scheduling changes. So definite lessons learned there. And with that, I guess we can open the chat box to questions. And if you have any comments or questions, you can email me. I don't think that shows it very well. Let me go back. It's my first name dot my last name at dnr.state.ga.us.
Okay. Anyone, if you have any questions, you're welcome to go ahead and text them now. You can certainly reach out, I would think, after the talk via email or phone call. And generally, I have to say, and that's what generally happens with these, is people like to contact you afterwards with some, after they gather their thoughts. So
That's fine with me.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
and if you have any other groups that you think we should collaborate with, we definitely would appreciate those suggestions too.
sounds good. And everyone that was on the call and yourself, we are trying to do this monthly now. So hopefully we'll be able to expand on the CISMA topic and get into more detail on specifics and things like that as we continue to do this every month. So thank you so much for your time today and giving the presentation. It was well done.
You're welcome.
I do have, it looks like I might have one question for you real quick before we get out of here. Let me. Oh, just a thank you. So you got a few thank yous there. So good job.
Sounds good.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot. I hope everyone has a good day.